So July 21st, 2021, 55 years since England last made it to a major football final. Euro 2020 glory beckoned under the arch of a gleaming Wembley Stadium. The Three Lions took an early lead, but seemingly playing under both the physical burden of England's arduous domestic calendar and carrying a perpetual mental burden, 55 years of hurt and all that. Clearly, jaded England could only limp the match to penalties. Missed spot kicks from Arsenal youngster Bukayo Saka and Man United's Marcus Rashford not only ended any hope of silverware for England, shockingly, it generated a tsunami of despicable abuse from alleged England fans. Amidst fans' passions, hopes and dreams, it is for some easy to forget that Saka and Rashford are mere human beings like you and I, albeit with that supreme talent for kicking a ball where mere mortals like us simply can't. There is, of course, a bigger picture here. These relative kids typically have loving families behind them who've held their hands from their very first breath, driving many thousands of miles to support their burgeoning careers and watching them performing miracles on the pitch for our entertainment and witnessing both the adulation, suffering, crushing fan-generated abuse as they do so. So what's it like to be a parent of a footballer on their own journey, from flyaway footballs in the back garden right the way through the professional game? Well, tonight, helping us explore those journeys of players closer to our Swindon Town hearts are Gary, father of Burton Albion's former Swindon Town Lone Star Jonny Smith, and Irene, subject to the technology, who is mum of former Man United, Leicester and Blackpool midfielder and former Swindon Town league-winning manager Richie Wellens. Not to mention, of course, grandmother to Man United starlet Charlie Wellens. So delighted you could both join us, guys. Irene and Gary, how are you both?
So I can't hear now. The mic's on.
Irene, we've got you loud and clear. How are you?
No.
Irene, we'll give you a couple of seconds for the tech to kick in. Can you hear us?
The mic's on.
Hey,
right, he's speaking now. It's showing that he's speaking. He's the host.
Why can't we hear it?
And I'm supposed to be speaking according to that.
Why can't we hear it?
No idea. You said it. Volume's on full. The mic's on.
Irene, have you got me at all?
You got to put on loudspeaker.
No, he's not said nothing about loudspeaker. Nothing's happening.
Irene, can you hear me? Right, bear with us, guys, whilst I try and get Irene on a fresh line.
I think she's been shaminated, I think
she has. I'll tell you what, I think you've done for it, Gary. I blame you entirely. nice, slick introduction, and bless her, we've lost her. But you can tell that the effort is there. So all being well, Irene will join us as the night poses on. But Gary, thank you ever so much for joining us. You and I have been in touch for I think well over a year, essentially, pretty much since Jonny joined the club. It was from a fan's point of view, and no doubt from a parent's point of view. It was a really, really interesting journey where we could just see that there was bags of potential and ability in your lad. And for one reason or another, it just didn't quite reach the heights that I think we all hoped it would get to. But nonetheless, as your boy is quite clearly showing up the road at Burton, there was no sort of shortcoming of ability on your lad's front. So I'm really, really chuffed you joined us, mate, for hopefully what will be a really interesting night, because in fact, I'll come on to that in a bit. First of all, I just want to introduce my perennial wingman, Tyler, to you, Gary. Tyler, how are you?
Oh, I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well indeed. Tyler, as I'm sure you'll testify, I'm sure you'll reflect what I just said about Jonny and how fondly regarded he is still at the county ground. And there's a whole host of us keeping an eye on his career. And I think there's quite a few of us that hopefully one day would like to see him back, because I think the general consensus in relation to Jonny was definitely the right player, just the wrong time, which was a little bit sad. What were your reflections on Jonny, Tyler, from the stands?
I mean, I feel like we never actually really got to see the best of him. But obviously, I remember him for that goal against Charlton on his debut, just because that first touch, that was filthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a way to start. And I mean, that was it, wasn't it? Silky touch. It was like he was wearing slippers, cut in, and what a finish. And I think we'd all seen the highlights of Jonny prior to arriving at Swindon after he had that sensational spell at Oldham. So there was no doubt that that, you know, as I say, right player. I just think as the way our season panned out, we were all of the opinion, yeah, right player, wrong time. But as I say, Gary, in setting this show up, and speaking to yourself and Irene, and also it might be added Eddie Broadbent, who very sadly can't be with us tonight due to some family matters. I talked about my time as when I was the main sponsor of Swindon Town Football Club under the auspices of 442. I had the real pleasure of rubbing shoulders with a lot of the players' families on pretty much a weekly basis, and some of the conversations that I would have on a weekly basis truly were fascinating. And it's one of those things that I think it's very, as I said in my intro, I think sometimes it's very easy to forget that the lads that are out there receiving absolute hurls of abuse and adulation in equal measure are all, ultimately are human beings, right? And there is a human cost, both positive and negative, to what goes on the pitch, and sometimes those stories very, very, very rarely come to light. So I thought it'd be really interesting if we could put a show together that sort of tries to get us under the skin of some of this stuff. So we don't necessarily want to kind of dig into, you know, the past in relation to obviously what didn't necessarily go fantastically well at Swindon Town in terms of specifics, but nonetheless we can go as deep into that as you feel is appropriate, Gary. So I hope that all makes perfect sense. Whilst we're all talking, I'm going to do my damnedest to try and sneak Irene in as well. Tyler, I'm sure you'll be doing the same. But so we may well have some interesting commentary from the Wellens household as things progress. But Gary, I guess the best way to start is almost like I mentioned float away footballs and whatnot. Have you still got memories of when Jonny first got a ball at his feet in the garden?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, it started off when he was around about 4. I used to play in the back garden with him. But one thing, Jonny, I've got 4 boys and 1 girl, so there's 5 in the family. Jonny is the second eldest. And yeah, he was, unfortunately at the time, he was the smallest. All the other 4 boys are all over 6 foot. But Jonny was the speed merchant. None of them could keep up with him in a race. So that was his forte at that time. And he used to go along to we used to take him to the school. I used to arrange football and coaching sessions. At the time, I was doing my own coaching badges as well. And he joined the local school one after hours. And one thing that they picked on straight away, that he was playing on the wing. Strange enough, he was on the right wing at 4.5.
Wow.
So yeah, and he played in the school team as well from obviously 7 onwards. But in relation to 5 onwards, we used to just take him to the local training. The guys from Tranmere Football Club used to come over, and also Wrexham Football Club at the time, and they used to host talent spotting and making sure, you know, looking at the kids to see if they were training right, see which one was making progress. And that was, you know, every parent goes there with the belief their son is the next Steven Gerrard, is the next, you know, Anthony Grant. They want their child to be the best. So it's quite hard because you see, you know, them all trying the best, and there's a lot of well, I wouldn't say animosity, but there's a lot of jealousy at that age as well, which is quite unusual in kids football. But it's got worse over the years, especially because I've actually heralded from a referee background, because I've done refereeing at English schools level for many years.
Yeah.
So I've seen this situation getting far worse than it used to be. But going back to to football side, I mean, he was getting watched by Wrexham and Tranmere from about 7 onwards, and then we joined the local league, and he started playing in the Walton and Kirkdale League. Now, as I say, I don't want to take the floor completely, but the Walton and Kirkdale League is a lot of famous footballers who have heralded from the Walton and Kirkdale League in Liverpool. And one of the most famous one, obviously, is Wayne Rooney. Wayne Rooney was picked up there. The league was run by Bob Pendleton, who brought Rooney to Everton in the first instance, and a guy called Dave Hill. Bob Pendleton was an amazing guy. He only died recently, actually, after all the years working for the Walton and Kirkdale League. But he worked. Unfortunately, with me being a Liverpool supporter at the time, it didn't herald well him taking all the players to Everton. But,
I love the way you said at the time, Gary. Quite clearly, you're a Town fan, right?
Well, it's funny that Tyler should mention that. Actually, I still think one of the best goals Jonny scored was when Adebayo pumped it down the wing and he just brought her in with his foot in one touch and then beat 2 and scored. And to be honest, he did a very similar thing in the first or second game at Burton as well, playing against Hull, who were running away with the league at the time in League One. And he did a similar type of goal, not to the quality of the one for Swindon. But firstly, I very remiss of me to say that, and to all the supporters that are on tonight from Swindon, I really do hope you'll get your place back in League One. It's well deserved, and I do watch the results every week to see, hopefully, a win on the board. And obviously, there's a lot of Johnny's best friends are still there playing in the team.
Bless you, Gary. And listen, I know that's sincere wishes, because you and I have kept in touch over the course of the period since Johnny's been up at Burton, and you've often quoted results to me before I've even had a chance to say anything to you. So I know that is a very, very sincere thing for you to say. I'll tell you, go back to a couple of things you mentioned though, Gary. It's interesting because, bearing in mind the way I've sort of teed the show up, you touched on a couple of really interesting things there about sort of jealousy and competitiveness at that sort of level where they're moving out of the grassroots and ending up at clubs. So it's interesting. So I've got a couple of points to sort of contribute there, and I bring sort of Tyler into this stage as well, because Tyler's roots are in and around the Swindon area, and Tyler knows a few of the lads that have come in through the youth system at our club over the years. But first thing I was going to mention was so my son, who he sometimes he popped on the show last week, and he's a regular at the county ground with me. But my son got picked up at West Ham quite a lot later than your boy. So you mentioned how sort of early your boy started showing promise. Well, my lad was a little bit of a later developer, very, very brave goalkeeper, who managed to. He got picked up. He was playing for an Afro-Caribbean side, funny enough, and he was the only white lad playing for this Afro-Caribbean side in London. And we got approached by a coach who was also of Afro-Caribbean heritage, and it all started the debate about, wow, you know, your boy must be a brave kid. Like, you know, he's the only white kid playing for this Afro-Caribbean side, like real strong Afro-Caribbean roots this side. And he was also training with kids that were he was taking shots from kids 4 or 5 years older than him, who physically was so much more developed. And he ended up sort of, he got his way into West Ham, and I saw exactly the things at West Ham that you were mentioning, albeit West Ham had a real kind of strong rule about keeping the parents away from the coaching environment. Like, they were absolutely strict as you like about keeping them well back from that. And I also reflect on some time that I spent out. A very good friend of mine has very close links with AC Milan out in Italy. And his son, Nicolo Chirina, is a burgeoning young kid out there. He's on the books of Monza at the moment. And I was invited to go and spend some time. So I do a little bit of goalkeeping training. And I was asked to go out and coach their goalkeepers whilst I was spending a bit of holiday time with them. And it really was like the West Ham experience I had on steroids, because like the Milan feeder side that Nicky was playing for at the time, they literally were, parents, you can't go anywhere near the kids, and they would make them sit literally hundreds of yards away up in the equivalent of being in a stand. Like, so if you consider what it's like at the county ground, imagine all the parents sitting at the back of the Stratton Bank. that's literally like as close as they might be allowed to get anywhere near the playing site, because they don't want parents hooting and hollering at the kids from the touchlines. They want the coach to be able to do his job. I always thought that was really interesting, and then also interestingly, at the end of every single game that Nicky plays in over in Italy, it always, regardless of result, ends up in a penalty shootout, and every single kid gets to take a penalty at the end of the game, which I thought was really interesting. So what I guess my only other sort of point of reference is I live a stone's throw from Crystal Palace's training ground. And most weekends I'll drive past the training ground at some point, and they've got a ban on parents actually watching the games themselves. And what you normally see is like a procession of adults outside the training ground trying to peek over brick walls and over these kind of like fence panels to try and watch some of the game. So do you, I mean, from your experience, Gary, have you noticed, because obviously you gave an explanation as to what it was like for Jonny when he was like back then sort of breaking through. Has that changed at all, do you feel, over time? Have you noticed parents getting pushed further away?
Yeah, I am an advocate of that as well, because obviously, again, with being a referee, and I was English schools referee, that the problem is they encroach on the pitch, they put pressure on the kids. The kids don't feel as if they can perform, because I've seen instances where the parents from even the opposing team are screaming, saying, run at him, run at him. I mean, the kid is 8 or 9.
Mm.
I mean, it's got a lot tougher than it used to be. And I'm a complete advocate of having parents behind the rope lines. I mean, unfortunately, in grassroots football, they haven't got a great deal of money. So, and you're counter affecting that with kids who, I mean, it's happened quite a lot in Liverpool, where kids who are, they're very good. They've got great ability, great technical ability, but they can't afford a pair of boots.
Yeah.
So, or they can't afford the subs to join the grassroots team. And we used to always be an advocate as well, having at least a couple of kids in our team, and we'd support them within the team structure to allow that to happen. But it's got a lot worse now, because obviously the grassroots pitches are now charging a fortune. You're paying for floodlights. You're paying for, as I say now, grassed off areas. So this, in effect, is a reduction on the kids actually playing grassroots football, and that upsets me a lot, because I am a complete grassroots supporter, especially because my own son has come through that route. So yeah, I mean, but the same token, from the point you're raising, yeah, 100%, they should be fenced off and kept away. It's happening at the under like sevens now. I mean, Walton Cato League, again, I can only refer to that because that's the league I've worked in for years. There now, you cannot go into the same footballing area now to watch your kids. You've got to be behind the fence, an actual steel fence now. And I think that helps a lot, definitely does.
Yeah, I mean, because it is I think there's so much. It's interesting what you were saying earlier about sort of like, the sort of the emotions that you see from the parents. I think so much of it is kind of born from kind of like positive emotion, like they're trying to encourage, but inevitably they're so emotionally entangled in wanting to see their kid achieve their dreams that you just see some parents like just lose grip of like exactly who they are and why they're there. And I mean, we'll come on to sort of like how some of that kind of crosses over into what we see, and indeed what Jonny obviously has to put up with from the sidelines of the pro game. But I do think that there's I do think that there's some obvious crossovers when emotions get a little bit beyond themselves. I just think with parents, it's that amplified,
That's hard. That Mark. When fans start screaming obscenities, that's the hardest bit from a parent point of view. Well,
we'll come on to that, Gary. So Tyler, like obviously you've grown up very close to the county ground, literally a stone's throw from it, and you've got connections and friendships with lads that have kind of made the breakthrough into like the academy side, and you've obviously got friendships of lads that are now kind of making baby steps into the first team environment. Have they ever shared with you their sort of thoughts on on sort of when they're at that sort of young level with parents by the pitch, how they feel about it?
No, to be honest, it's never sort of one thing that's been mentioned. It's more just like they'll support them away from the pitch, but then when they're sort of like training and going through the coaching process, it's more just that they let the coaches do what the coaches are there to do rather than getting involved.
Yeah, do you think? I mean, one of the things that I would really like to, I would really hope is the case. I mean, with the late great Alan McLaughlin, of course, was head of youth development for a very for a fair old crack at the Swindon Town, and had a sort of fabled reputation in amongst the supporter base. I think the interesting thing is that. Knowing, and I mean, I was lucky enough to come into contact with Alan on a few occasions. I don't think he would have actually stood for any nonsense in and around the club. I think he's pretty, when it comes to sort of like the welfare of the kids and their progression, I don't think he would suffer any falls. And obviously, Tyler, for those that were listening in, they'll be very well aware that we had Lee Peacock on, who's obviously now operating in that role. Lee Peacock was on the show last week, and it would be fair to say, Tyler, if there was a parent crossing the line, I think they'd get short shrift from Lee. Would you not agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Lee would not be the kind of chap to mince his words, but
no, he wouldn't hold back at all.
No, indeed. Well, all right. So what was also interesting there, Gary, was you talked about that sort of the age. It really surprised me. You said about Jonny was showing that level of ability at like 4.5. That's incredible. I mean, when I think back when my kids were like 4.5, I mean, literally like babies. So what must have been going through your mind watching a 4.5-year-old absolutely rinsing fullbacks? that must have been something.
Yeah, I mean, Jonny was small, was very small at the time, but again, very rapid. And Liverpool, like local playing areas and grassroots football, have scouts from all over. And you probably get this in Swindon and all the leagues there. You have scouts from all the clubs who are consistently watching players. And yeah, he sort of like joined his first team at 7. Because obviously that's when the league starts for the one we get there at that age, and he joined Miller's team, and actually I become the coach of that team the following year, and we went on to basically win several league championships, and then the Champions League, which was. The Champions League is all the leagues in Liverpool the winners play each other at the end of the year, and the team that we actually built together at that stage that won it, that was under 13, and they lost all the players then by under 13. All players had gone to either clubs or had moved on to other teams at that stage, so the team actually broke up. But from sort of like 9 onwards, I think I'm just trying to remember the guy's name. He actually ended up as director of football for Norwich, and he was at Wrexham, and he was the one who took our Jonny to Wrexham, and he started playing for them from around 10 onwards. And one thing I liked about Wrexham was the lower league teams at that stage was that they looked after and nurtured the children properly. They were always, making sure that they were had the right kit. They were all, they were supported well. The parents were kept in touch. The coach spoke to the parents, before and after matches and training. And they had Wrexham were very, very good. I mean. I have to say, in some respects, I mean, obviously I've been involved with both Everton and Liverpool at various levels. It's not the same when you sort of like dealing with teams higher up the pyramid. It becomes, you become dispensable quite easily, especially when you get towards the Championship or Premier League levels, because a kid can come in from the Netherlands and your kid's gone. Goodbye. See ya. Even though he might have been there 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So this pressure that they're always under. I mean, I think players, and it's hard for fans to see this, but players from round about 9 onwards are under constant pressure of either being replaced, not performing well enough, the ups and downs of, oh, I did that wrong in that match, Dad, what do you think? Should I have done this? And I always said to him, well, you make a mistake, you move on, you learn from it, move on, that's it. That's all you can say.
Yeah.
But there is significant pressure in that area on them. And when you consider, just how many, because obviously we've been right through teams from 9 right through to under 16, and then obviously you go into the youth get selected for the youth or not. And so there's all these points where at the end of each season, whether is your child going to be kept on?
Yeah.
Is he going to get another year? Is he good enough? Is there any way we can help him? You start, all this pressure points. Besides the fact that as a parent, I worked full time. For me, I had to drive from Liverpool to Wrexham 4 times a week, which I think it's a 100-mile round trip every time, and that was 4 times a week. Finish work, drive up there, fall asleep in the car while he was training. He gets back in the car, I drive home. That's it.
Well, I'll tell you what, Gary. My own personal reflections is I'm so chuffed you tapped into this, because my son's sort of ends of his time at West Ham truly was tragic, and so much so that I spoke to Archie about coming on tonight and talking about that journey. And emotionally, it was just really, really hard for him to come on tonight and talk about it, and he politely declined. But he's quite happy for me to sort of, give my parental reflections on it. Archie's nearly 18 now. He's about to go off to university, and thankfully he's re-engaged with football. But he was shown the door as part of a mass clear out at Rush Green when Sam Allardyce was sacked as West Ham boss. So to give you an idea when he was there. And it was pretty brutal. Like we got a phone call that literally was almost exactly what you said. Now, bearing in mind, he was of that age that you've mentioned. And we just got a phone call one random Sunday afternoon by the goalkeeping coach. And he just literally said, look, really sorry, but, don't bring your boy to West Ham anymore. Fact is, we're having a big clear out at the training ground. Sam's gone. We're kind of starting afresh, right across the piece with all the youth lads. And your boy's just not made the cut. And when I asked him what it was, what were his shortcomings, all he could tell me was that he said, look, I've got to tell you this, the kid that's in the age group below him can take the ball from a cross. He can bowl it out. If I lay 10 cones out, he can hit every single one of those cones overarm, first time of asking. He said, and at the moment, your boy's proficient with his left foot, but he can't kick with his right foot. And I'm really sorry, but yeah, he's just not making the grade. The knock-on effect for that, in terms of how Archie received that news, was like truly devastating. He essentially locked himself away in his bedroom for a couple of hours and cried his eyes out, like wouldn't let us in to talk to him at all. By the time things had settled down and he came out and he was willing to talk to us, you could see that there was just this little twinkle in his eye had disappeared. Sadly, in terms of how he felt about football, he turned his back on football, and it meant so much to him that he'd kind of got to a stage where he could play for West Ham. But then to get that news, he was like, right, okay, okay, this isn't for me anymore. I've just sort of lost my love for it. And that then crossed over into, anyone that knows me and that sees me up and around Swindon knows I'm absolutely Swindon Town barmy. And Archie, from a really young age, had always been part of that journey. Suddenly that tap was turned off and he refused to come to any games with me. He also started putting on a lot of weight. So we started realising that things were pretty bad when a grandparent actually pointed out that he looked like he was carrying a lot of excess weight compared to what he was used to carrying. And we'd obviously said, well, look, he's cut down on his football. We're trying to watch his diet and whatnot. Well, we hadn't changed his dieting at all. Then he confided in us about 6 months later, his weight was literally getting out of control. And he confided in us that he'd basically been binge eating. And he was really unhappy and it really affected his mental health. Thankfully, whilst I'm not a fan of egg chasing, he still had a really great set of hands on him. And the school picked him up and he started playing rugby. and he got his kind of appetite back for playing sports. And then he developed his own taste, and he sort of got into the Army Cadets, which really got into his fitness. And this was something that, you know, was so far removed from football, but still gave him that sense of being part of a big team. And it really helped rebuild his self-esteem. But yeah, I mean, it was a very, very, very difficult journey. I mean, Tyler, you obviously know Archie probably as well as anyone else that might be listening in tonight. I mean, does that surprise you? I mean, I've shared part of that story with you before, but does that surprise you? Does that resonate with the you know, just thinking about the emotions of a young kid growing up, grassroots, and talking about the impact of that pressure and whatnot? Have you got any reflections on that?
I mean, it definitely surprised me because I didn't actually remember you telling me any of that before. So as much as you want to claim to, I don't really remember it. But yeah, it has to be tough when you're that age, finding out something like that, to then think you might make it and then just get sort of chucked out the door.
Yeah, and it really was as kind of brutal as that. I mean, I think we're very realistic as a family, and I could see that, you know, was he quite making that grade? And I'll tell you what was very interesting at the time, Gary. One of Archie's reflections to me was that, like, Dad, I just want to have fun. You know, you tell me, an 8-9-year-old kid that doesn't just want to have fun. But that pressure really is something, isn't it? At that age, they've got to have very broad shoulders at a very young age to start making the grade right at the top of the pyramid.
I think it affects nearly all the pyramids, even down to Conference League level. That the pressure is always there. It certainly has got a lot worse than it used to be. And he got offered to move a couple of times away from Wrexham in the early years when he was under 12, under 13. He got offered to go to Tranmere. And I said, no, you know, Wrexham have been very good. We're supporting them because they've supported him. And with him also being on the small side, because I think you'll probably agree, Mark. I mean, most of these scouts that go to watch kids play, oh, let's look at the size of the mother. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, what the hell has that got to do with a kid's technical ability? The only reason why they say, let's look at the size of the mother, because they know that the child's boy is going to be bigger than the mother is. So,
well, I'll tell you what, it's interesting you should say that, Gary, because that was actually a conversation I had pitch side. So someone that was very well acquainted with the academy sidled up to me and said, you know, when he was like, you know, I said to him, you know, I don't think my boy's quite sort of hitting the standards they're looking for here. You could tell by the way the coaches were talking to him. And this was sort of 2 or 3 weeks before he got the news. And this chap turned to me and said, well, looking at you, Mark, he said, you obviously you played an half decent standard of football yourself, but you know, you're what, 6 foot? And you know, looking at your wife, I saw her up here last week with Archie, and your wife's like 5'5", you know, with her heels on. He said, you know, they're going to be looking at that, and they're going to be taking that really seriously. And I was like, oh wow, okay. I mean, yeah, well, that's those were judgments being made obviously very, very early. But the point was a valid one, because he was like, if you look at the average height of your Premier League goalkeeper now, he said, like, you know, most clubs are basically recruiting basketball players that, you know, so he said, you know, you're going to have to be realistic about this. And at that point, yeah, my heart really started to sink. And obviously I kept that away from Arch, but it was obvious that people were drawing those exact conclusions that you're talking about.
Yeah. I think, you know, I always say to, well, you know, what do you think of Messi? How big's Messi? You know, he's probably the best footballer in the world. How big is he? Yeah. And unfortunately, that doesn't transpose across to scouts who are looking in local leagues, to players. And you know, one of the other aspects of this, I mean, I was lucky because I had a good job, so therefore I could support Jonny, because the amount of support a parent's got to give to a player trying to break through the ranks is absolutely phenomenal, both from a training aspect, the games, you know, the training on a Saturday morning, then it used to be obviously the match on a Sunday, and obviously your commitments to other members of your own family, to look after the other kids as well. It's a huge burden that you've got to have to put a child through a club. And you know, as I say, I was quite lucky that I had a good job that I had the flexibility to go around that.
Yeah, I mean, we similarly. I mean, we live on the London-Kent border, and on if you put a pin in the map and then put a pin in the map of Rush Green and saw where we had to take our young man for his training with West Ham, it doesn't actually look too bad. But you factor in the London traffic, the M25, the time we had to travel was always rush hour, and having to make the crossing, both going under the Dartford crossing and coming back. I think one of the other impacts as well is that some of these, I mean, take my son, for example, his school were great because they realised what a big opportunity it was. So they'd let him sneak out sort of half an hour before. But then that obviously has an impact on, like, you think about the human being and you think about, whilst that's great, he's sneaking off to football, but that's 30 odd minutes a week times how many weeks in a year where he's not actually mixing with his peers. And where he's already starting to put himself under the pressure of having to get his head in the space of going to train, at a professional top level football club. So it's the cumulative sort of impact on that is often something I've thought about as a parent. But what I mean, in terms of, so if we sort of round off the grassroots part of it, Gary, with no doubt there's going to be people on here with young kids and there's going to be people here coaching kids and whatnot. What tips would you give them, given that obviously your lad's been able to make the breakthrough into the pro game, and considering all the elements we talked about, are there any obvious sort of grassroots based tips that you give a parent or a coach of young kids?
I mean, there's only one really I would give, and that's to support your child no matter what he wants to do, not what you want to do. And that may seem, quite a wide scope and statement to make, but I see so many issues where parents are they're trying to live their own life through the child again and make him be the success. And I think it's all about making your son enjoy the football he wants to do. And, that's what I would say is critical in all that. If he's got the talent, he's going to be picked up. It's as simple as that. I also don't like, from the grassroots side, children getting picked up as young as like 7 into clubs now. I mean, Liverpool and Everton are quite, they're taking children now 5.5 and 6 into the, excellent centres. And I don't think it's right. I mean, I've got first-hand experience of a child who used to live just up the road from me who got taken into Everton at 5, and by 8 he had shin splints.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine.
And now the kid was devastated. He had to have sort of like a year out as his legs were growing, because obviously they're nobody near fully grown at that age. And eventually Everton, dropped him when he was around about 10. I mean, to get finished at 10, it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, the kids had obviously got talent, and but like with Archie, I mean, this other child was devastated. I mean, his friend circle was gone. He went into himself. All the people he knew were associated to Everton. And now he come out and he's got nobody. So not only did he lose his football, he's lost all his friends as well, because he's not part of that formation anymore. So it's really tough, really tough. I mean, no one sees all that side of football, and they're letting go and the kids crying, walking away. It's horrible. I mean, I've witnessed it because I've seen it through all the years that, I used to take Jonny, and it's not nice, and you're always waiting for your turn, obviously. And that coincided with, obviously 12 or 13, we actually involved them with obviously, it's all fitness based now, and what protein shakes you have, what rescue drinks you have after football, etc. And then he went to Primal Health, which was his sole aim, was to grow his body to a much higher fitness level. And he was doing his degree in exactly that, sports science, the guy who runs Primal Health. Yep. And he made Jonny one of his his main focus. So he was measuring body fat. And I mean, bear in mind, this is now over And this was now 13. So this is over 11 years ago now. So this is how far back that goes. I mean, they were doing all this sports science with him, measuring his thighs, his legs, putting him through all the fitness routines. This was on top of the training and the academy stuff he was doing.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, I think there are a lot of cliches that you hear generally getting bounded around. Normally, what you get are the sound bites from youth coaches at the club about how, when they've got to let players go, it's the hardest part of their job. They feel really sad, and you believe them when you hear that. You do believe them, but I often reflect on my son's own journey, which when I kind of then reverse that back to fans when they're being particularly tough on players, that actually, I mean, the whole inspiration for doing this show tonight was obviously my kids' journey, some of the conversations you and I had. But I think if you actually saw like the impact and the tears at home, and I mean, okay, so there's a couple of other things that have hit the news. Obviously, over the last sort of 12 months, our ex-super striker Charlie Austin has come out and been very, very vocal about the ages of which kids are brought into academies and the pressures that they're put under. And Charlie's unequivocally said, look, kids have just got to be allowed to play and enjoy themselves. And he's been very, very very vocal in that respect. Look, if it's to be, it's to be. Just let a kid go out and play with a smile on their face. That he's very critical of the kind of the academy structure per se. And I think there's also, I mean, there's been as football's really started to get to grips with player welfare and player mental health. I mean, there's still always, it always feels like every year there's a couple of stories that hit the news of these young kids that have gone and taken the ultimate step, and football's rejected them, and they've ended up sort of taking their own life as a consequence, which is clearly absolutely appalling. I mean, for every kid that takes that ultimate step, I genuinely believe that the pyramid underneath that of these lads that are just thrown on the scrap heap must be truly enormous. And having experienced something very, very sort of close to it myself in terms of the impact on my own son, it's something I'm very, very passionate about. But look, I mean, we're moving away from the grassroots side of things now, and let's come in from a point of view that so clearly Johnny's sort of pricked up the sort of like the ears of scouts and whatnot. How do you find the sort of you sort of touched on it earlier, Gary, the impact of scouts themselves, people making approaches to sort of the talent's been recognised and he's playing somewhere, but someone wants him to go and play somewhere else. Did you come across sort of, you don't necessarily need to mention clubs or names if you don't want to, but did you find it's a bit of a viper's nest in terms of unscrupulous scouts?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit hard to talk because I ended up as Blackburn Rovers scouts actually for a short while later on in the football pyramid. But
Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, Gary, but that's all right.
It was, I mean, it was only because of my association with all the football arena as such. Because I ended up as a coach for Liverpool schoolboys under 10s. I used to do the coaching for them. As well as Sick Johnny. So football has been quite large in my life for a long time. I suppose from the scouting side, I'm not a lover of them, to be honest, Mark. And the reason why I say that is that most times there's, like, for instance, in the north, I mean, I'm not sure how many Swindon actually have, but you have like 2 or 3 or 4 scouts who will be from Everton, who will be working the same area. You'll have the same amount from Liverpool working all the grassroots pitches, and they turn up there and they've got their, they're like assassins, the Bristol City coat on, their Everton coat on, and they're watching, and then you see all the parents saying, the scouts here, you have to do your best, and they put all the kids under pressure. You've got to play your best today, and in fact, Johnny was never like that. If he was put under pressure like that, he'd play worse. Actually, so I never used to say anything because I didn't want to put him under pressure. But I'm not a lover of it, to be honest. Of anything under 9, I'd say. I mean, the old term years ago used to be probably, Mark, when Ashley was coming through as well, was 9 and up was when, I mean, for instance, Alexander Arnold, I watched him play. He got picked up at 9 for Liverpool. John Kenny at Everton, another one player who got picked up. These are players that played around the same leagues as Johnny was in, similar ages, and I watched them all grow. I refereed Ross Barkley. I refereed him loads of times playing for Broad Green Comprehensive School. So you see all these players coming through, and I think one of the counter effects from this is that, if you look at grassroots football, and if you look now, what they're taking the kids at 5. Well, that never used to happen. They used to take them at 9. So the kid who's 5, who's got this super talent, or is very good, or he's very confident with the ball, he would share that confidence and share that ability with players around him. So at grassroots level, between 5 and 9, there's a knowledge share, there's a talent share from that kid to all the others. So some other children will learn, hey, that was a good little flick he did then. How did you do that? But now, because the clubs are taking them at 5 and 6, that talent share is gone. So you go to the grassroots pitches now, and there's no talent share anymore because the scouts have took them. I'm totally anti that, totally against it.
Yeah. So do you? I mean, is that sort of part of the world? Did you feel like when Johnny was coming through that the sort of scouting aspect of things was pretty sort of persistent and unscrupulous, or did you feel that they were like working towards certain guidelines that would protect kids? Because I'm guessing.
I don't think they work to it. I think they just, they want their little tick on the board for the club that they're working with. They want to be kept on. They want to work up the football pyramid and be taken on as a professional scouts, because obviously most of them are freelance scouts linked to a club now. They're not necessarily employed by the club either. And that makes it even more of a dog fight. If there's a child in the team who's starting to do really well and he's noticed, then he's taken. Basically the scout goes along and says, "Oh, we'll monitor him the next week." And then he's gone. So he's ended up at a club.
Now I've gone back to a speaker, but now he's gone back off. Hello.
Hello, Irene, are you with us?
It's put me back as a speaker now, but nothing's happening.
Oh, Irene, I'm so hoping you can hear me.
But if I click off the speaker now, I don't know how to get that back off now.
Well, to everyone listening, you can see that Irene's doing her best to join us tonight. Sorry, Gary. Irene has sent me, guys, by the way, Irene has sent me a raft of messages while we've been trying to sort this. She's having a nightmare with the tech at her house. So I think someone needs to have a word with Richie and get him to pay the bill, I think, especially now he's back in gainful employment. But so fingers crossed we'll have Irene back on at some point. Tyler, as my co-host, could you do your best to try and see if you can liaise with Irene on the tech?
Don't you worry, son. I'll be on it.
You're a top man. So Gary, moving ahead then. So obviously the whole sort of agents part of it, yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I mean, obviously now thinking about sort of Johnny's journey and sort of reflecting on the friends that I'm guessing he's building as he starts to sort of move into that academy academy environment. What was how difficult was his adjustment from sort of going from sort of grassroots into the pro academy? Was it easy for him? Was it sort of duck to water type stuff, or was it something that he and indeed all the other lads really had to work on? Because I've seen lads in that environment and it be very clunky for them, but then yet weirdly they seem to get marked for superstardom, even though the ones that look like they're taking to it like a duck to water don't quite seem to be getting there, and that always fascinated me. But how did you sort of like view that adjustment from moving from grassroots into the pro game?
Well, Johnny sort of like lives football, and that's never changed. Even today, that's still the same. I always say with Jonny, he is an honest player. He can only give 100% because that's all he knows what to do. And that's not me being, pedantic towards him. He just, that's his game. He can only give 100%. So going from grassroots football to, concentrated football is what I would say is the operative word. He found that relatively straightforward. One thing, obviously, that is not good is it's like in any football team as well. They always have more than one player covering one position, and it's the same in academies. They all have multiple players covering multiple positions. So whether he's going to be picked this Saturday for the youth team, whether he's going to be playing, that was a weekly stress, call every time. Because obviously he didn't actually start to excel in regards to size until he worked with Primal Health, which was under 13 level. And he had a tremendous coach there. I don't know, probably your listeners do as well, is Joey Jones. Joey Jones is the famous one.
Yes.
Well, Joey Jones was Jonny's coach. And then after that, Lee Jones, who was Liverpool's striker, he was his coach. Then Ben Heath and Steve O'Shaughnessy, who was ex-Leeds Rochdale. So he's had good A badge holders coaching him through the ranks, right up to Steve did the under 15s, and then Lee Jones was the under 16s coach. And then obviously that's then the big major cut off, because all of a sudden at under 16 level, you're going from a team of 18 to 20 players to who's going to get, a scholarship, who's going to get it. And there's only going to be 2 or 3 out of 16 to 18 players who are going to get it. And that is horrendous. That year, the under 16 year, is horrendous. To get that,
it must be very difficult, Gary, because you touched on it earlier about rivalries, and that kind of year where it's building into kind of that not everyone's going to get the chance. That must really test like any team environment, because it must get a little bit dog eat dog, surely.
It does, yeah, and and also nasty tackles, even in training. I mean, it goes on. You'd like to say it doesn't, but it does. You see a bit of shifting towards who's talking to the coach. It's just a horrible time. That under 16 year is horrendous, because I mean, there's so many kids want to make it to that next level. I think, what is it now? Out of all people who end up at academies, only 0.1% of all of them will make it as a professional. I mean, 0.1%. I think they said it's 2% to get to a youth scholarship level, and then after that, it's minute, the ones who actually make it from that point. 0.1%. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can absolutely see. I mean, it's just human nature, isn't it? I think you want it so, but I mean, what you're clearly describing here is, and again, if you think about the broader context of what this show's all about, like the pressure cooker environment that these lads have been involved in from a very, very early age right through to that point. And if you excuse my kitchen analogies, but it literally is, the kettle's coming to a boil at that stage, and it's human nature that tempers are going to fray. And I mean, you can just see that kind of you can see that kind of stuff, bobbling over. But I mean, at what age did you start to feel very sort of confident that Jonny had a real chance here, Gary? Was it with the club he was at, or did you just generally feel that, or you might have generally thought that he's got a real chance here?
Well, it's strange, really. I mean, I look back on it and say which was turning points. Jonny was always a left back, a fast left back. That's what, and it may seem strange, but that's what was his position. If not, he played in grassroots level in the 10 role, and then as he moved into the academies and into Wrexham, he was at left back until under 14 level, and then because of his pace and technical ability, he ended up playing only one match on the right wing, and scored 2 or 3 goals in that game, and that was the change. That was the switch. Yeah. He ended up then playing in either a left wing or a right wing role going forward, and then into Wrexham themselves. But in regards to your question you're asking, you don't feel safe at any time, even when he got the scholarship to go through to Wrexham. There's also undercurrents there, even from because the next thing that happens is you get agents and parents are not tutored in how to handle an agent, or they feel beholden to an agent because they've never dealt with one. I mean, me having a business background, I did it a different way. I actually said, okay, all the agents that actually approached me, I actually interviewed them all. And then, and that's exactly what it did. So what can you offer him? How many players have you got with you? Which clubs are you affiliated to? This is so critical. You don't get taught this as a parent.
Which clubs? And it's clearly not something. It's clearly not something you can prepare for. And I was going to mention the word unscrupulous as well, because it'd be wrong of us to sort of tar all agents with the same brush, I guess. But I'll tell you what's in there. As well as living near the Palace training ground, I'm also not far from Millwall's training ground. In fact, Millwall's training ground's far closer to my home than Palace. And I'll tell you what's very clearly evident is when you drive past Millwall's training ground, the old Barclays Bank training ground in Downham, which is just on the outskirts of a little hamlet called Bromley, that I'm sure everyone's heard of. There's a whopping great sign on the gate that quite clearly says, agents must not enter this ground unless with prior appointment, or words to that effect. So it's interesting when you drive past there and you see the training grounds full with a lot of the young academy lads. There's always lots of very sleek looking performance cars parked outside with lots of people on their mobile phones with the shades on, flicking through their various notes and whatnot. And I've never really sort of stopped the car and sat and watched these guys behave. But my money would be on those guys being agents. And I'm sure you've probably got sort of similar stories of seeing similar things up and down the country.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite funny because I interviewed about 6 or 7 agents. And, as I say, lucky I was involved in football. So I knew I had been advised, and, how long had you been an agent? What manager connections have they got? So if your lad moves off from this club, can they get him in another one? Which clubs are they affiliated to, etc. And I digress slightly there because there's quite a funny story. So the very last agent we wanted to see was USM, which is probably one of the largest agents. And the Harry Kane's agent contacted me and said, we want to take Jonny. We want him. We've got an agent who's going to work with him. Promise the earth. And the funny thing was, my wife, we tidied up the house. We've done, the best crockery came out. Out into the, conservatory. We set it all up, and next thing is all these Mercedes and Bentleys turned up. These 4 or 6 agents got out and they walked into the house. They all sat down. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith. Jonny, yeah, he was all buzzing there. Here's Harry Kane's agent in front of us here. And he sits down and my wife goes, I'm sorry to say, but someone has walked in dog muck. So I made trips, unfortunately, right to our house. So that was a little story that was, you think back at these things that are key moments in a footballer's life, and right through the living room is your best Labrador's excrement.
Yeah, yeah. You don't really associate a guy getting out of a Bentley with a guy sort of curiously picking through the grip of his trainers or his shoes with a stick, or finding that tuft of grass on the driveway that most of us like to keep there for a handy occasion.
Yeah, but it was quite funny. But I mean, that the agency actually, that's who we went with in the end, because I mean it was quite funny, that one. But I think it's important that the agents, whoever, and again, if any parents are listening who are going through that, is someone that your actual child can relate with as well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we had James, Johnny's age, I think, is James Tunnicliffe, ex-footballer again, under USM, and he's been superb. You know, never pressurised him, and one of the moves we thought would really work, and I'm coming back around to Swindon now, and Johnny was at Bristol City. He was ready to push on there. Lee Johnson was still there at the time, and Richie Wellens was doing really well at Swindon. And one thing we liked about Richie was that he was great with young players. He liked fast flowing, quick touch football, and that was really appealed to Johnny. Really appealed to him to get in there. And then obviously, 2 or 3 weeks into it, and Richie's unfortunately moved off. He's been headhunted, which was a real, pity. And I think from his Swindon time experience, as I say, he's got some great friends still playing for Swindon, and he's always watching what Swindon are doing. And I don't think he had the rub of the green there. There's quite a few things happened prior to him leaving, and fallouts and things like that. But that's another story. But in regards to when they moved him into the flat down there, they had him and Tyler in a flat, and the flat suffered with air conditioning problems, and Johnny got a really bad chest infection caused by this air conditioning system within the building. It was never ever came out. But I mean, I think in one match he got an asthma attack and he was pulled. I don't know if you remember that one. He was pulled off.
I do. I remember it very well.
He was pulled off after about 15-20 minutes because he actually couldn't run. But this was all down to this flat. The air conditioning system within the flat, and even anyone who went in there after them, because they found out it was this in the end, and then they moved him and Tyler out to a different flat, and bingo, everything was fine again. But unfortunately, the manager change and then situations after that conspired against us in that year. I would say.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, so funny enough, as I'm sure you're well aware, we had a very high-profile game at the County Ground a couple of weeks ago, and let's just say certain personalities left the field. I think both sides of that debate made their feelings towards each other very, very clearly known to each other. But I, you know what? We won't even dwell on that. But taking it back a step, Gary. So, as a parent, right? Talk me through the emotions of actually seeing your kid making his pro debut. Do you remember when it was? And can you remember the sort of story of the day?
Well, if I tell you this, you wouldn't actually believe me, because we actually drove 400 miles for 4 minutes of play. So we actually he actually got called to the Wrexham first team, and obviously at that point I think he was 17 at the time, and they were playing Torquay away, and it was first away trip with Dan Mills, who was the manager at the time, and we ended up driving down to Torquay, all full of joy. He's been picked for the first team. He's on the bench. You want to see him come on. And it got to the 87th minute when he actually made his debut. so we clapped, and then the next thing is we're walking out. But that was his debut for Wrexham, and then after that he played. Well, again, and this relates back to football again, but because he wouldn't. I suppose I can't really say that, but I mean, there was issues with the manager and them trying to push him to use a different agent, and then club came in Bristol City came in to buy him, and from there, within 3 weeks of that game,
you just invited me to speak.
Nope.
Now I've come up as a speaker, and now the sound's gone off because I'm not listening anymore. Hello?
Irene, is that Irene? Can you hear us?
Just got in touch with me and
Are you
said,
a loudspeaker?
what?
Sorry,
Mate, your
Gary.
phone's on, so your
It's
phone's on
okay,
full, so
that's
it doesn't
okay.
matter.
Oh,
See, so he's got me as a speaker now, but now I can't hear it.
Irene, can you hear me? Oh, right. So we've got Irene. Hopefully, Irene can hear us talk. Irene, we can hear you speaking.
She's gone
But
again.
you clearly can't hear us, or she's gone again. So sorry, Gary. So you're talking about Bristol City. So he's made the switch from Wrexham. He's gone to City. So did you feel like when he finally made the breakthrough at City? Did you feel that was his debut proper, or was that Wrexham experience super special?
The Wrexham, well, considering he'd been there from sort of like 10 and a half, the Wrexham one was special. I really wanted them to start, but then again, it just got a bit, political, especially with Bristol City coming into him, because Wrexham wants them to sign a 2-year deal so that they could get, a lot more of a fee. As it happened, it's just obviously becomes a training fee if you're not. So there's a lot of political aspects involved in that. But going to Bristol City gives him a platform now to really push on. And then, strangely enough, straight after going to Bristol, he got pushed out on loan straight away to Cheltenham. To Gary Johnson, obviously, who's Lee Johnson's father. But then within a very short period of time, he got a torn abductor, which as you know, with abductor muscles, they take a long time to heal. So he basically ended up playing about 2 or 3 games for them. And then he ended up going back to Bristol City to get physio on his abductor muscle, which and that's one of the big downsides of the football, because it might only be a small injury, and the next thing is he's missing for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Then it takes at least another 1 week or 2 weeks to get back to match fitness. And it is players or spectators who go to games, and obviously I sit by them quite a lot. They go, I'm not talking about my son or whatever, but they say, oh God, he's really slow. Well, the guy's just been out for 3 months. He's just come back or whatever, and he's going to be slow. It takes such a long time now. As you're like a racehorse, really. You're bred to be a racehorse in football now. I mean, right throughout all the leagues, even down to conference level. And it takes that extra work to get yourself to that position, to perform to that level in a game where spectators say, "Oh yeah, God, he put a shift in there." You've got to be totally fit to be putting that sort of shift in. You can't be having 6 pints of bitter the night before. It just won't happen. As it happens, Johnny doesn't drink, so it's
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I mean, we've had Vic Morgan, who's very kindly listening in tonight. So Vic's not only been a supporter of Swindon Town for decades, but he's also a real sort of like legacy voice over the airways for both GWRFM and also the BBC. And Vic was on with us a couple of weeks ago, and we had a conversation about some of the grief that our captain Dion Conroy's been getting this season. Interestingly enough, it then came out about three weeks ago that Dion's actually been struggling with a kind of reoccurrence of a long-standing injury. Then Dion was back out the side because of form, and then Dion's first game back was a bit of a thumping that we had away to Exeter, where it's fair to say he was probably on the pointy end of some of the stick that the fans were dishing out that night. Now, interestingly, his following game, he was playing like almost like back on top of his form, and then he followed it up with another incredible performance. And it sort of ties in with what you're saying, Gary, about look, it's almost like brushing the rust off, isn't it? Like you need to get into that rhythm. You need to get into that pattern of play. But interestingly for Dion, he's obviously had some serious injuries over the course of his career. So he's not only he got into a rhythm of playing, but then perversely that was working against him with an inflammation of his injury. And then when he's been sort of like he's come out the side because of form and obviously dealing with that injury, he's then got back into the side. brushed the rust off, and then he's getting back up the form again. And it's sort of, so yeah, I mean, it's that must just be a perpetual frustration for footballers, particularly if you are kind of trying to nurse an injury as well.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny was out with COVID, and obviously with him having asthma, he was affected badly with Christmas. So I think the whole virtually 30 players came down with it right on Christmas. Well, actually, he tested positive in our house on Christmas Eve, Johnny, and then all of a sudden, he was out 2.5 weeks with the COVID, and then after the minute he comes back, he then pulls a calf muscle or tears a calf muscle. So this is the after effects of the fact that he was out 2.5 weeks in the first instance with COVID, because all of a sudden you're not training the muscles, and then you'll get an overzealous manager or coach who will go, right, we're doing box to box runs now, we're doing line to line at the end of the session, and right at the last minute of that session, bingo, his calf pops. So there's now 6 weeks out. So when all of a sudden now you're coming back, it's going to take at least 2 weeks to get back to any sort of match fitness. So there's 8 weeks now from the time that he went out in the first instance, and that affects every player. It's not just him. It's
And then obviously, Gary, you then as a parent, you're sort of, I guess this is where the kind of mental health and well-being comes into the piece, because that's obviously a crushing blow for them. I mean, how clearly, I appreciate Johnny's not necessarily representative of the entire sort of football base in terms of their ability to sort of deal with that kind of absence. But I mean, what are the kind of things that these lads like literally go through when they know they're out? Because I think there is a perception amongst some supporters that they think, oh, it's all right. Like, they're literally going to put their feet up. They're going to sit on the beach for a few weeks. But what is it? What's the reality of that?
It's nothing like that. It's nothing like that at all. They actually get depressed. Believe it or not, they get depressed with it because they can't train. It's something that they've done. Well, he's done since he was 9. He gets up, he trains, he plays football, he watches what he eats. Then it's weights, then it's gym work, then it's stretching, then it's the foam roller, and we have all these motorized foam rollers now. So he's doing his calf, he's doing his thighs, and it's like a 24/7 performance every day. And yes, there is a couple of odd days in the week that they have a bit of downtime. Yes, they've got to do that because otherwise they go round a bend. But it's not what it used to be years ago, where players could go. I mean, like the belief of Mills, who was the manager then at Wrexham. Let's all go for a pint the night before a match and have a drink in a bar and have a Guinness and all that. That's all gone. That's all gone. Yeah. That doesn't happen anymore. The years that took effect, they're dinosaurs. They've gone. Pardon the pun.
Well, some of them have, Gary. Some of them have. What, Gary? So you talked about, you mentioned the goal earlier, Tyler. I know that you're a firm favourite of Johnny's debut at Swindon Town. Tell me, Gary, talk about you now. What went through your mind? Were you at the county ground the day where Johnny made his debut for Swindon? What went through your? Can you describe the emotions that go through your mind when he scores a goal like that on his debut?
Well, just overwhelming sense of pride of in him for what he's done. The ability to see the ball. I mean, I look into football a little bit probably deeper than probably maybe others do, because we've been associated with so long. So is it the ball from let's pick that goal actually, because Odemayo kicks it down the line. He glances over his shoulder and sees the ball coming dropping down, and then he's already bringing his foot round to control it, and he uses the pace of his run to push the ball to the left, and then takes it on his left foot, goes past the 2 defenders, and then just slots it into the bottom corner. Now it was just as you said before, it looked like he had slippers on. It was if that would have been in for instance, the Premier League, it would have been goal of the season or a contender, because it was so well executed.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, Tyler, this is probably where you should pitch in, because obviously you would have been right behind the goal at that stage. But I mean, I'm sure you'll agree, Tyler, had it not been for the emergence of Scott Twine later in the season, I think that would have probably been goal of the season, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if Twiney didn't score that absolute belter at Ipswich, it definitely would have had a chance. But as soon as he's hit that one in from like 40 yards out, no debate to be had, really.
So Gary, how do you manage to contain? Because we've talked a lot about the kind of like like the pent up pressure, the emotions of wanting to see your boy do well, and obviously with your background in football, you've probably got a cooler head than some parents. But I mean, what were you out your seat? Were you absolutely sort of losing?
Just absolutely. And then the first thing you do is pick up your phone and see, the shout started coming out for it, because it was such a classic goal, And then I had it on repeat on all sorts. The goal was on 15 seconds, and that goal was on repeat, I think, for about a month after it.
So Gary, listen, another thing that I really wanted to touch on, and what's lovely when I say this is that if you look a little bit further down our list, we're joined tonight by Phil Reid, who's Louis Reid's dad, and hopefully he's got a smile on his face when I tell this story. But one of the things that I really enjoyed, and it was something that when I was at 442, I mentioned at the start, I had a lot of contact with parents. I used to always love to see, particularly the younger lads, I used to always love to see them being stopped by the side of the Arkle stand on their way down to their cars, and seeing the parent just. I seldom watch the players. I always try if they're with their folks. I always enjoy watching the families' faces as their boys are posing for photographs and signing autographs. Posing for photographs, signing their autographs. I can see the swell of pride, and I think particularly being a dad myself of relatively young kids, I see. That must be a special moment for you as well. I mean, we'll come on to the more nefarious side of that, of course, but when you're seeing sort of your kids effectively being asked to sign their name on someone's shirt or on their football or whatnot, I mean, what does that feel like as a parent of a pro?
Yeah, I'm more of an advocate than anything. I push him into it, because especially if he comes to the edge of the pitch, like it happened the other day at Burton Albion. We came to the edge of the pitch and there was a couple of young kids there. Can we have his picture? I said, yeah, come on, let's get in there. And the mum's great taking the picture. And I thought, God, that's my son. They're taking the picture off. It gives you a huge sense of pride in what not only what he's achieved in that, is what we've done to get him to that point, and also the sacrifices we've done to get him to that point. It could have all been so much different. I mean, he had the opportunity. I mean, my job involves working in Australia now and again, and I had the option to. Robbie Fowler, who I know personally, was actually going to Perth Glory, and the office I was working in was going to be in Perth, and we were going to go and join up and take him to Perth Glory. Only I turned the job off and down in the end. This was many years ago. But it's funny how things turn around, and when you actually see, the number of pictures. Johnny loves like helping the charities out. The people who are raffling shirts, he'll go and get a shirt and get the team to sign it and put it up. In fact, he sent quite a few shirts out while he was at Swindon, to fans alike, actually, and a couple of charity ones. Because he likes to be involved in that. It makes you very proud. Yeah, 100%.
Well, I'll tell you what, Gary, it's lovely to be able to say this from the bottom of my heart. And I know it'd be echoed by Tyler, who's met Phil certainly more than I have, which is certainly to my detriment. But listening to what you've just said there, it's almost a mirror of how Phil kind of reflects his family values and his attitudes towards Louis. And Louis would appear to be a very, very similar kind of lad as well, in terms of the efforts that he makes with supporters, his attitude towards just being a good, well-rounded individual, and projecting that onto the fan. And it's so important. But it does come back to the upbringing, and And what was lovely, a few weeks ago, I met with outside the ground with Phil and his wife, Louis' mum, and you can certainly see the impact of strong parenting on the output of their kid in amongst the supporters. And so I salute you, and Phil. I think I said to you something similar at the time. If you're listening in, mate, good on you, because it does make a huge difference knowing that we've got kids with good arts wearing our shirt and wearing the badge. But yeah, it's like I say, Gary, it's almost like a kind of mirror image. But look, moving on a touch, I'm conscious of time, Gary. I don't want to be sort of eating too much into your bedtime. No doubt you've got to get up for work and whatnot in the morning. But touching on that kind of the sort of more nefarious side, we talked about the nice side of things, but I guess it must be even more painful when you're, when you've got the kind of family morals that you have and the attitude that you have. It must be very, very difficult when you're hearing fans sort of, digging your son out as well and hammering him with criticism. And I mean, I get frustrated. I'm a supporter, and sometimes I'm standing in the town end and I can listen to people around me that clearly don't have the same sort of, whether it's a level of understanding of football or they've got the same view on football that I've got. And certain players are getting just constantly hammered. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be the most foul-mouthed abuse, but when you hear supporters sort of at that peak and even crossing the line, I mean, I appreciate how it must feel, but talk to me about that experience, Gary. Like, how do you keep a lid on things?
It's horrendous. I mean, that's the real tough side. I mean, obviously, we had a little bit with Swindon in that year, and I was on one of the well-known forums for Swindon under a name, and I'd stand as corner. I mean, prior to that, I mean, I was at. This is strange enough. He was playing for Oldham at that time. He was playing against Barrow, and I was in the stands at Barrow, sitting there, and this supporter behind him, and he was saying, "Snap his legs, just snap his legs."
Oh, blimey!
And he's shouting this out, and me and my wife are sitting there, and in the end, and he was like half drunk or whatever, and in the end, I just couldn't take any more. I actually turned around and said, "That's my son. You're telling to snap his legs. I don't think that's right. If he's good enough to, and he scored in that match. Actually, he broke through and scored against Barrow in that game. But at the end of the match, the fan actually apologised to me and said, no, I shouldn't have said that. He said he was just killing us. I said, well, there's a point, and that's from the opposite side, from an opposite team. But the hardest bit is when you hear, oh, he's not good enough. Move him on, get him out. Let's get somebody else on. And there's always many reasons in some instances where he hasn't played well for whatever reason. It could have been that he's healing from an abductor. Could be that another reason, or the fact that Johnny likes the ball played to his feet primarily, or working in triangles or things like that. And if it's coming to him at 30 mile an hour at 6 foot, it's not really conducive to his game of football. And so supporters will sort of like see that and go, oh, he didn't bat that ball. He's rubbish. He's crap. And you look at them and you go, oh, I'm sorry, he's not 6'4" and can't stop a ball at 30 mile an hour with his teeth. But, if he played on the floor, he'd do a lot better. So I think it is really hard, because I find it tough to hold me tongue sometimes, especially in them environments. But strangely enough, one of the best times I had was at Swindon when he was playing for an opposing team. He was playing for Tranmere and he scored against Swindon. And
Thanks for reminding us.
And I was in the side. I was in the hospitality. I bought a meal at Swindon, and I was sitting there, and I think it was Phil Brown was the manager, running up down the line at the time. I think Swindon won actually the game 2-1, I think. But the guy that was going around the hospitality was an ex Swindon player, and he had this in laugh, and then of course he picked on me because he knew I was Johnny's dad. And at half time he picked on me again because Johnny had scored as well. But people in the stands and who I was talking to, because obviously I cheered when Jonny scored, which didn't go down too well, sitting right by the director's box. But they were lovely people, and I had a great affinity to them. So when obviously the opportunity came up for him to join Swindon, I was complete. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go there. In fact, one of the first games I ended up there because of the pandemic. Was standing in that empty stand to the left where of the director's box, and I'd say the stewards were lovely. It was just a great family atmosphere. I really liked it there. It was good.
Well, it's funny at Swindon because we talk a lot about it on this show about we're very hair trigger, and I've got very strong sort of feelings as to why that is. I mean, we had a very hard set of cards dealt to us in 89-90 when we got demoted 2 divisions after getting promoted to what's now the Premier League. And then we had a very difficult spell when Steve McMahon was manager of Swindon, which pretty much divided the fan base in 2. And obviously, history, I think history has been a very sort of I'll choose my words carefully here because there's still a very anti-Steve McMahon sort of sentiment amongst large sort of chunks of the fan base. But that tenure, the tail end of his tenure, caused an awful lot of kind of discord amongst the supporter base. And I think there's still sort of, very deep scars as a club. And the fact that we've been to the brink on a few occasions and we're starting to rebuild now and the club's starting to emerge from sort of 30 years of very like difficult times and a lot of uncertainty. I mean, we tend to refer to supporting Swindon as being like on a roller coaster. There's never an easy day, but I think it's good that you sort of that you quite clearly still feel affectionate towards Swindon as a club, because I mean, I mean, there's got to be something about Swindon that's a bit special. I've been supporting them for 30 plus years, and I live on the other side of London, so
You've got so much memorabilia. The market's incredible. I thought you could open up a market down there selling Swindon gear.
Yeah, I probably should. To be fair, you've probably got the. But I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what's interesting though, Gary. Tyler, I'll bring you in at this stage because Tyler's gone, and we'll have a. I mean, we won't spend too long talking about the bet that you've got, Tyler,
for fuck's sake,
with
not this.
SI Adelaide. No, we're not going to talk about the bet, but you should probably, I mean, spend a little bit of time, Tyler, talking to us about the conversations that you've had with Ellis's family over the course of the season, because I'm just going to frame it like this. So, Gary, I mentioned to you, this is where I suddenly lose about half of my follower base on Twitter, but I'm post 442, I went into the police service. I'm a retired police officer now. I've been for a number of months. And I used to have some very interesting conversations with people that I typically nicked, but that tie into what you were saying really about the lad up in Barrow. So you would typically get sort of, when you're dealing with an incident, you get absolute dog's abuse when you turn up, and then when you're dealing with an incident itself. And then when you come away from the incident, whether you go back to a police station, whatever it might be, and things have calmed down a little bit, 9 out of 10 times, and I really do mean 9 out of 10 times, people would apologise to me and say, I didn't mean those things, mate. It wasn't personal about you. And they would say the most horrific things about what they wanted to see happen to me and my family. But they'd always say the same. It actually wasn't personal. It was about the uniform. It's about what you're representing. It's not about you, and I'm sorry, and things like that. And 9 out of 10 times you accept the apology and you move on. It's just part of life. Tyler, I just wanted to frame that conversation that you've had with Ellis's family over sort of some of the stick that you openly said. You were giving Ellis, who was having an indifferent start to the season, shall we say? Probably a good time for you to have a little chat about that.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but none of it was ever like targeting him as a person. It was always just I didn't think he was a good left back. Like he couldn't defend very well. Was always my thoughts on it. And then obviously, what game was it that we moved him into midfield? It was just around the turn of the year. We moved him into centre mid, and it's like you moved him further forward where he can show off his passing range, his on the ball ability, and it was just a different player. And then I can't remember what game it was that I caught Ellis at, and like he'd heard about the bet that me and my mate had made, and we just joked about it, and I apologised to him for saying that I didn't think he was very good, because he is clearly a good player, just not, I wouldn't say a good left back.
Yeah.
But then so I'd spoke to him. I'd spoke to his dad, who is absolutely lovely. If you get the chance to meet him and talk to him, do it. He's got all the time in the world, it seems, for Swindon fans. Because they're all Gills like background, and they all started as Gillingham fans, and then Ellis came across here, and now all of them just can't get enough of the Swin. So they've all changed their mind on it, and no, it's just seeing things from like more of like a players' families view. You can see the difference there, and to be fair to his dad, he never had a problem with me. It was always just potentially word things a bit differently. But at the same time, I've spoke to Ellis about it personally, apologised, and now we whenever we sort of see each other, it's a laugh and a joke sort
It's
of
all
thing.
good banter. So Gary, the bet is that if Ellis scores before the end of the season, Tyler's got to get EI3 tattooed onto his finger.
Oh my God. I'm
So
going to put a bet on. Tell me the next
I'm gonna
team.
make
I'll put a bet on.
well, so Gary, it would be. I'm going to say this to you, right? As a huge Jonny Smith fan, and you know that I'm not just saying this because you're on the show with us tonight. If Jonny Smith decides that, do you know what, he's had enough of Burton, all in the interests of, like I said to you at the start, right player, wrong time. You get Jonny Smith back in a Swindon Town shirt, mate, and I am going to get JS11 tattooed on my right bum cheek, and that is a virtual handshake moment between you and I, mate. All right, so make sure Johnny's aware.
Well, that'll match my one on the other cheek.
Listen, Gary, we're I think just in the interest of your time, mate, I'm conscious you've given us so much. So I genuinely had so much that we could have talked about tonight, and bless her, Irene has sent through her sincerest apologies. As anyone that listens back to the show will hear, she's made several attempts to get on tonight, but her text just not up to it, sadly. It's probably done us a favour, actually, because your insights, Gary, on being a parent to a pro have been, honestly, mate, it's been fascinating listening, and please do pass on all the best wishes from Swindon Town Football Club and all of our fans.
He's actually here. He's actually with me. Not in this room right now.
Johnny, I'm pleased you're listening, mate, because like I said, the concept of you being tattooed on my rear end, I'm sure has put a smile on your face, buddy. So Johnny, don't be a stranger, mate. You're hugely well regarded at Swindon Town Football Club. And Gary, it's testament to you that you said about getting onto. It would have been the Town End Forum, I'm sure of it, but the fact that you're willing to engage with supporters and you're willing to come on tonight and talk so openly and honestly in the way that you have is really, really welcome. I'm blown away by what you've offered us. So please don't be a stranger, Gary.
Wish you all the luck in getting back to League One. Hopefully you'll get to playoffs and get up.
Oh, we surely will. And one thing I promise you is that what we'll do, we'll come up next year, we'll give Johnny and his boys a good battering at the Pirelli Stadium, and turn Johnny's head back towards the West Country, which is clearly where his heart resides.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for having me as well, and thanks to all your listeners who put up with me for the last hour and a bit.
You're very welcome, Gary. Always, like I said, don't be a stranger, buddy. Come back on anytime you like.
Right, lovely. Thanks very much.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Well, Tyler, what did you make of that then?
He's just absolutely lovely, isn't he?
Yeah, very, very nice bloke. And as someone I mentioned Phil Reed earlier on, and various conversations we've had with him. There's some very, very distinct parallels, aren't there, between sort of Gary's attitudes and the sort of the family background, the family values, and what we see from Louis, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. Like you can see that the way they act with fans outside the ground, it's all clearly come like from the parenting. So it don't really come as a surprise if you've met either Phil or Gary. Clearly, that the players are the way they are.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we touched on some really, really interesting topics there. I think obviously I started the show by talking about sort of going back and referencing the European Cup, sorry, the European Championship finals, and the pressure that those lads are under, and I think Saka's probably the one that, whilst Rashford's still a very, very young lad, I just go back over to what Gary was saying about the immense pressure that these kids are under from such a tender age. You can kind of start to sort of understand that there's probably a bigger picture than us just being rubbish at penalties when it comes to those finals. Some of these kids have been under that immense pressure from such an early age to then carry it right the way through to the pinnacle of European international tournaments. I mean, that is going to take some strength of character, isn't it? But I think, I mean, it's an interesting one because, listen, I'm never going to turn around and say that fans don't have a right to put the boot in on players where they don't necessarily see the effort going in, or they don't necessarily feel that they're contributing to their team the way that they should. But nonetheless, I think Gary's thrown up some very interesting sort of topics there, and if it's a bit of increased empathy that we're looking for, I think that's got to be it, isn't it? Like, just sort of think before you open your mouth, particularly when you consider some of the abuse we've heard Swindon Town players getting from our own fans in recent weeks. Was there anything that sort of stood out from sort of Gary's overview from yourself, mate, that you carry forward that you would hope other fans might pick up as well?
It's definitely more just, if you want to be critical in the right way, but more than anything, support the players, because if you get on their backs, that they won't be as good. Main example for me would have to be Ben Gladwin. Yeah, if you get on his back from the first minute, and of course he ain't going to do well. Whereas if you give him a chance, it can all tick. And Port Vale away would be the prime example.
Yeah. I mean, I think what Gary's done in relation to Gladwin, obviously we've talked about the fact that Ben's had some serious injuries throughout his career, and clearly the Ben Gladwin we've got now isn't necessarily the Ben Gladwin that we'll remember from 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. That's just an impossibility, both in terms of age and obviously the need to come back from some of these injuries. But I mean, Gary was talking about, when a player's not quite, putting it in the way that you would expect it to. It's not necessarily because of a lack of effort. Like these lads could be carrying like an abductor injury, or they could be, just literally just trying to get themselves back up. He used the expression like a thoroughbred racehorse, didn't he? And the need to kind of have that, that rhythm. You can't just click your fingers and expect them to perform last week the way they did this week. If there's like been an injury smack bang in the middle of it, it's going to take time, a little bit of patience. But I mean, listen, I guess it's wishful thinking, isn't it? At the end of the day, I think I don't think our little show is going to turn the tide of how football fans behave towards players, but you got to start somewhere, right? And I think if at the end of the day, all that we kind of like achieved tonight with some of these insights is just to get people to stop and think a little bit more about the human being on the other side of that white line before they open their mouth, and then maybe just address that kind of level of vitriol, then maybe we might have sort of achieved something. Not that we were necessarily setting out to kind of like turn that tide tonight, but an interesting debate nonetheless. Well, all right. I mean, Tyler, I mean, obviously I would normally at this stage say, right, we're looking ahead to the weekend, but obviously we've got a weekend off. But I mean, I would normally say we ain't got a lot to talk about, but there's been some seismic news this week, hasn't there? Well, seismic to say the least.
Just keep it on football for 1 second. We have got to consider that Jojo's probably got the biggest game of his career in the coming week with the African qualifiers for the World Cup against Nigeria.
Yeah. So that's all very well and good, providing we get the Jojo back that we sent out there. That's all. That's all I'll say to that.
Hopefully,
I don't mean to be selfish. No, we wish Jojo all the best, and I mean I feel for Jojo because I thought some of the criticism that he was getting from particularly from Leroy Rossignol during the commentaries for some of the African Cup of Nations games were quite frankly brutal and ill-informed. But then he's got the benefit of having X number of games as a professional player and manager under his belt. And hey, I'm just a standalone fan. But no, we wish Jojo all the best. Obviously, I'll go back to my initial point, Tyler. Obviously, last night at the scrutiny meeting at Swindon Borough Council, there was a resounding thumbs up from the scrutiny committee to sanction the sale of Swindon Town's rather ring rusty ground to Swindon Town Football Club. Now, we're getting there, aren't we? This is actually going to happen, Tyler, is it not?
Well, yeah, it's just seems to be a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But as soon as it's done, I mean, we've had to buy it with proof of plans for development of the ground, which, I mean, if that's not a sign of good things to come, then I'm not quite sure what is.
Yeah, I touched on 30 years of hurt and all that, talking about, my lifespan as a Swindon fan and some of the ups and downs we've had, and now that, the psyche of the Swindon Town Football Club supporter. I think, there's obviously going to be, chunks of the fan base that are going to be feeling a little bit cynical because, we've been here before. But this is very, very different. I mean, we've never got this far down the line. I mean, conversations have been had about the ground being purchased and whatnot. But, I mean, this really is looking like the real deal now. We've got plans being accepted. We've got the council giving it the thumbs up. And now, from what I understand, it's a question of, as you say, the legalities and then also the fundraising. So, obviously 50-50 sales, so half the funds are going to come from Clem, and I'm sure the trust are going to be forthcoming sooner rather than later in relation to their plan for raising the monies from the supporter base. But I think what's really struck me, particularly on the socials over the last sort of 24 hours, has been the number of people that are readily stepping up and saying, right, let me know when we're out and play my part. Like, I want to get involved. And I think we've got to take that really, really, really seriously when you consider the amount of support that the official supporters club and the trust got over the summer with the surge of membership that tied into, obviously, the court case. And I think, if we can reflect the same level of commitment and buy-in from the fan base in relation to raising funds for the county ground, we've got to be positive, haven't we, Tyler? Got to be positive now.
Yeah, definitely. If there's anything that can bring the fan base together as one, it's the possibility of owning the ground that we all call home. So, fingers crossed that the sooner the trust have the news, we can get it, and we can all start, like you say, playing our part and showing that we mean business as much as a big, bold Australian plumber.
Yes, indeed. Well, listen, we salute the trust, Steve Mighton and the team. Obviously, Rob, who's now at the club as chief executive, has put a huge amount of effort into what the trust are up to before making the migration over to Swindon Town Football Club. We salute Rob and obviously Clem and the club as well for doing their part. And the plans that have done the rounds tonight on socials with a rather spectacular looking town end with hotel and conferencing centre built into it truly do look absolutely amazing. And obviously you can see what the Stratton Bank looks like with a roof on it as well. It really does look like transformational stuff. So, but in classic Swindon Town style, let's just keep our powder dry for the time being. I said last night on Twitter it was party time. I did mean it. I did sink a few jars and raise my glass because I do think it's going to happen. Famous last words, but I do think it's going to happen. And it really, really will be seismic. And the impact on Swindon having their own asset that they own, that they can leverage manageable debt against. That's just huge in terms of raising funds for development of the squad, development of the academy. Truly, truly transformational to have such a big asset for the club to leverage. So exciting times to be a Swindon Town supporter. Tyler, anything else in the mix that you want to bring to the table that I may have missed in my enthusiasm?
No, not that I can think of, other than obviously season tickets going on sale today.
Yes, they do, and yeah, there's been the usual sort of plus and minus fallouts on that. I think my take on it is really quite straightforward. it's not even an elephant in the room, so we've just been talking about it. But listen, I mean, if we're really serious about owning our own ground, redeveloping our own ground, making big strides as a football club, the money's got to come from somewhere, right? We can't just expect Clem to just keep putting his hand into his pocket and throwing large chunks of change. I mean, he's already doing that, all right? But if we're serious about buying the ground, you know, the money's got, you know, we've got to play our part. And if that means an increase in season ticket prices, match day prices and such like, as long as we can see that money's going into our club and our club is progressing, I hope that even it's the most ardent of critic wouldn't begrudge that cash. It's not for me to say what's a lot of money to one person, because that's not necessarily a lot of money to another person, and so on and so on. And that's where you get that interesting debate. But the fact is, let's just remain mindful of the bigger picture here. You know, if we want to get out of this division, you know, better players cost more money. You know, if we want a better stadium costs more money. It's just a fact. So if we really do have ambitions to get up the leagues, we're going to have to put our hands in our pocket. Appreciate it at the time where the cost of living is going up exponentially. It is difficult, but you know, listen, we can't have our cake and eat it. So you know, let's just, you know, just everyone's just got to do their bit, and they support the club as best they can with the amount that they can. And if they can't, then they can't. So be it. But I think we've all just got to go into this with a spirit of let's all do what we can. In relation to our little show, Tyler, we've got some very interesting, very interesting guests moving forward. I'm going to keep you powder dry and not say too much. But what I will say is, joining us next week for a round of silly questions is none other than former centre back Colossus Matty Hayward is going to be joining us next Wednesday at 9:00. So make a note in your diary. I will, of course, start tweeting about it pretty much as soon as we hang up. But Matty's going to be coming on. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to Lee Peacock's show from last week, as if you wonder what these silly questions are all about, do tap back into Lee's show and enjoy that, because we certainly did, Tyler. Would it be fair to say?
Oh, no, unbelievable.
Well, what was it you described it as? A comedy goldmine?
Absolutely. Pure comedy gold.
Yeah, Lee was on top form. Matty's really looking forward to it. Matty's heard Lee's show and he's absolutely determined to outdo Lee in the comedy stakes. So please send me your questions via DM or tweet, or if you want to join us on the night and come on and ask your question yourself, you're more than welcome to do so. But we look forward to having Matty with us next week. And as I say, I'm licking my lips because the lineup of guests beyond Matty are absolutely fantastic. Tyler, I've shared them with you earlier today in terms of confirmations that we've had. Fair to say the guests that our listeners will be impressed?
Yeah, I'd say you've got to be impressed. There was one name that you've quote unquote approached that I'm preying on. So
yes, well, yeah. Don't say too much, Tyler. Don't say too much. But yes, I have approached said individual, and I'm optimistic. Let's just say that. But confirmed and in the bag, we have some fantastic guests coming on from a club management, from a directorial point of view, from a playing point of view, and in terms of ex-legends of the club, we've got some brilliant names lined up. So I'm just going to keep you tantalised, because it's probably good to keep you all guessing. But anyway, without further ado, Ty, I think we'll draw a line under it and let all these good people get off to bed. A pleasure as always, Ty, and a pleasure to have everybody's ears. Guys, thanks ever so much. Cracking show. Loved every second of it. Catch up with you, if not on Twitter, in person-ish, next Wednesday at 9. Take care for now.